Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. First, hello everyone and welcome. We're so happy that you've joined us today for the first of 3 events sponsored by the Mary Hope Center for Reconciliation and the Mary Hope Foundation. And the webinar series is titled Healing Divides from Within, Localizing Peacebuilding. And each of the 3 events will focus on facets of localizing peacebuilding. And today we have a fantastic group of practitioners who are working in their own communities on projects centered around various processes, including peacebuilding, restorative justice, truth-telling, and reconciliation. And we're so excited to hear from them as they share their thoughts and experiences and explore such topics from their vantage points as inside reconcilers or local peacebuilding and restorative justice and truth-telling practitioners. Topics such as what are some of the well-being, psychosocial healing, and support needs of local reconcilers and peacebuilders? And why is it important to address these needs? And also, how can the needs of local peacebuilders be addressed in the design and implementation of peacebuilding and reconciliation activities? It's now my privilege to introduce our moderator, Antti Pentikainen, who is the director of the Mary Hope Center for Reconciliation. Antti has experience with peace processes and reconciliation in places including Somalia, South Sudan, and Libya. And his work focuses on understanding the roles of insider reconcilers, connecting better community-level efforts and state-level political processes, and developing support mechanisms for these efforts. So Antti, I now turn it over to you.
Thank you, Colette. And I'll start my remarks with a story. So in 2016, the then Finnish Prime Minister, whom I was assisting as a special envoy for the refugee crisis in the Mediterranean, after we were returning from one of the European Council meetings in airplane, he asked me to join him, and I said, we have a conflict in our northern part that I don't really know what to do about it. Could you please go and look into and talk with our indigenous people and see what could be done? And so I went there, and the Indigenous People's Parliament had proposed to establish a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and I proposed to the Prime Minister that we would start to pursue that further. And so he tasked me to start the preparations. And part of the preparations, while we were looking into previous examples, how this process had gone, most recently in Canada, where they had a really comprehensive listening process for the survivors of the boarding schools and producing quite comprehensive report with, I think, about 90 recommendations. But those recommendations got stuck as in so many other places. And then I came up with the process design where we wanted to complement the commission of something that I called Insider Reconcilers, and creating a training where actually the parties of the conflict together in an academic space would experiment what this process could look like and build capacity and trust among themselves so that they could work on the great number of smaller conflicts that existed within and between the communities. And so I was bold enough to pursue that, or some might say a little bit crazy, but I started to train these, and actually in the course of 25 Insider Reconcilers, there were several significant parties of the conflict. There was quite significant amount of distrust in the process, and that was difficult for some participants, especially coming from minority parts of the conflict. But there was one significant turning point with that course. So I was able to bring Father Michael Lapsley from South Africa, who is convening a workshop on healing of the memories, where basically through art and storytelling, people start to share their life stories. And then there are certain rituals that they follow in terms of moving beyond the stalemate that was before. And as Father Michael said, when there's silence around certain topic, there is so much healing that's been needed on that. And out of that workshop, in an incredible, almost like miraculous way, these insider reconcilers, several of them were able to share something that had happened in their life that had never shared with anyone before. And at least for a moment, an incredible amount of trust between the actors was created. And I think this group got an illumination what it would mean to become liberated from the intergenerational pain. And out of that illumination, this group had, they still struggled, but they had like a common vision what the process could become. And when the process moved forward, there was extremely heavy push from the human rights folks that only saw this process through something that's related to the retributive justice, or at least only reparations, but didn't really have interest or insight what it means in terms of the effects on the intergenerational pain. But this group, with that illumination, basically carried that community into the process. So just a couple of weeks ago, finally, the Finnish government nominated the commissioners, and the commission will start their work, or has already started their work. I wanted to start with the story, sharing how significant these opportunities for individual healing are in terms of building that connection and trust between the actors. And we have now chance of hearing from 4 really incredible actors and individuals in this space. The first one that I would like to invite to speak is Jody Geddes. She will be calling from Oakland. Jody is with the Restorative Justice Oakland Youth, RJOY, as we say. And Jody has been in a leadership role, basically advancing practical connections and understanding what needs to be done at community level when truth and reconciliation processes are done there, and also really in detail learning and supporting processes that include restorative justice, but also link truth-telling to reparations and reconciliation. So, Jody, we are just so privileged and honored to have you. Just yesterday, I was able to attend a meeting where you were leading a gathering between nationwide actors to discuss how can we better support these processes. So thank you for everything you've done, and thank you for joining this webinar. I hand it over to you, Jody.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. Jody Geddes, pronouns are she, her, they, them. I'm here on Ohlone land and Chochenyo land in Oakland, California, and I descend from the Tainos of Jamaica as well as the Maroons. I think it's important to name that because all of that kind of history and the dreaming about who I am, I think it's led me to the work that I do, or the life work that I do. I think I often say to people, I wish there was something else I was doing, maybe a dancer and creative in other ways, and yet I continue to be led on this path. So it's really great to be here with you all. One of the things that I'll say when I think about this question of what are some of the well-being, needs of practitioners and reconcilers, peace builders and communities, one of the things that really comes to my mind is that there are often folks who are working in communities in which they come from, they look like, and they share many similarities with, right? So there's this way in which the kind of peace building and reconciliation work is also a part of our own healing journey. And there often isn't space to talk about mental health or to dream about mental health and wellness as well as healing. And I think it's similar to the way that we use the terms justice and so on to have these conversations, but we might not really reimagine what does that look like? What does healing really look like? What does justice really look like? Moving it out of the kind of language that we use to describe it. And we know across many languages, there might not even be words to talk about mental health. There might not even be words to talk about wellness, right? And so there is a reimagining that needs to be done, I think, not just with the spaces that, for example, I might hold in community from a restorative lens, but also with the practitioners like me who are also holding those spaces, really beginning to reimagine things like healing. And I think a lot about mental health and wellness because it feels so good to be in community, right? And at RJOY, we talk about radical hospitality, hosting people with food, music. We gonna love on you in everything that you bring. And that's how we all enter into spaces, right? And yet we know the body keeps the score. And so, I'm a new mom, for example. You can see this is what my house looks like now, of a 2-year-old. And I think about in the beginning of the pandemic, kept saying like, I'm okay or I'm tired. I was moving between those places. And my village, I've never been able to witness village in this way, held circle for me, held multiple circles for me, because I was doing the thing that I felt like I needed to do in terms of being a parent, being a worker, being a partner, all of these things. And yet my body was just like, you need to sleep and rest. That is not about resting to later on get a task done, but rest because it is deserved, right? Like rest for the sake of rest, which our society and many societies don't uphold, right? When we think about capitalism and many other isms that exist. And so when I think about some of the needs, I think about just the need to rest, the need even for practitioners, peace builders and reconcilers to also have space to reimagine. Because sometimes in the doing, we might give up, but can we tell those that we're in relationship with and community with that we've given up? Right? Because it's not about work. It is simply about us living free, at least for me, free and liberated lives, right? Not just about passing policy or using language to describe these things, but really the feeling of liberation and the feeling of freedom and the feeling of healing in ways that are very real. So I think there's a need to talk about and do something about the mental health and wellness needs of practitioners in community. So that's one piece. And then the other piece I'm going to say, I think that there's a need to celebrate often, right? It's like, here's this win and move on to the next thing. And celebration is really important. Celebration is a part of remembrance of where we are now, but also what we've come from. And so how do we create space to celebrate and create space for communities that we're in relationship with to witness celebration as a point of joy, as a point of organizing? And I think sometimes celebration can often be missing. And our joy, that's something we do often. We do it big. And it's challenging when you are meeting through Zoom and other areas. We're still thinking about how do we celebrate you? We have, people who are buying homes, people who are having children, people who are getting their degrees, people who are starting businesses, people who are breaking generational curses, experiencing joy, being able to talk about that. How do we hold space for celebration in the midst of what feels like chaos and sometimes very much darkness? And I know that that isn't easy, but if I have the ability to reimagine in the midst of that, how do I hold space where people can bear witness to even my joy, to know that it's possible for them? And so that's what I'll say. Do you want me to continue to go through all the questions, but I'll pass it back off to you, Auntie, but I think that's what is coming up for me in this moment.
Thank you, Jody. I really loved the way you kept this practical, and I think your core message is, if I could summarize that, it's just you can also live your life within this work, and you can actually bring those joys of your life into this work, and by that strengthen the community also around you that can sustain the pressures of this work and care for each other amidst those pressures, and it doesn't have to be made more complicated than that. So it was so incredibly wise, wonderful. I'll come back to some of the thoughts when we have the Q&A, but thank you, Jody, for this. One reason why I really wanted to have you and we wanted to have you was because of Amal Ali and just making the connection between the two of you, because I had the chance of observing the Iowa City Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Amal is the vice chair of this commission that has been established actually a year ago by the city council, but has since then been really struggling amidst a lot of political pressures. And I was just observing through a Zoom, Amal, your leadership, I would say, in the meeting in that very complicated space on multiple fronts. And what I sensed through you and from you is that you had very deep community connections. You knew what was going on, and you were together with the other commissioners, of course, but bringing the ethical demand, the urgency, the need to do practical work, the need to be community-based, survivor-based, having those voices there. And also respect for those actors who were there. You were sharing about several of those, and then also how you were building trust between the commission. So I just want to say I was in very deep admiration and awe on how I saw you exercising servant leadership in that space. We're so happy to have you and share about your journey, but also your findings and recommendations within being vice chair of the Iowa Commission. Over to you, Amal.
Thank you so much. My name is Amel Ali. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And like Auntie said, I am the vice chair of the Iowa City Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And I'm going to do this a little differently than Jody because I think that it's important to hear about kind of the turmoil and pushback that I've gotten from our elected officials and kind of what I've done to help navigate these issues. So the TRC was formed after all of the protesting and stuff that happened after the murder of George Floyd. On June 3rd, protesters were gassed by our police and state troopers, and there was a lot of, turmoil within the city and within protesters, and it almost seemed to me like a generational thing. Also, there were a lot of elder Black activists that were saying, this is not what you need to be doing, and younger kids who were just wanting to go out there and march and just do what they felt like they needed to do to have their voices heard. So the TRC was formed. They allocated $1 million towards Black Lives Matter initiatives, is what they called it. Throughout the first month of the TRC, we were given literally nothing from the city. They didn't tell us about, open records rules. They didn't tell us how to hold a meeting. They didn't tell us how this process goes, what a Truth and Reconciliation Commission does, how it even functions, what it would look like in the city. They provided nothing for us. And there were issues within the chair and the commissioners. The chair ended up resigning, and the city paused the TRC for 1 month. Because they thought, we could reboot it and say, we're going to support you guys and help you guys move forward. After they restarted the TRC, we pretty much started from zero. There was no help in deciding bylaws, nothing. So I just did a lot of research and we wanted to get a facilitator. We had gotten these awesome recommendations about getting these great facilitators, people who are already involved in these processes, who had much more knowledge than we did. And the city gave us $200,000 to be able to hire a facilitator. And we found someone we really liked. We felt like we loved everything that they had to offer, all of their expertise. And then when we submitted their proposal to the council, it was denied for no reason. They just said, no, we just want someone local to do this, but we're not going to provide you with anything else. So in being the vice chair, and with this new commission that we had, I had to have a lot of hope and positive attitude, because I didn't want these 5 new commissioners who had come in, because I knew that they were already, this sucks. They kept just doing everything they could to slow down our processes. They said, we'll allow this for your budget, but we won't give you this. And there's just been so many different things that they've done to slow down the process. And it's been hard, especially before the pause. And so I've had to, kind of really dig in and find the hope and just look for the bigger picture of things. I am an immigrant. My family immigrated here from Sudan in 2000. Both of my parents are political asylums. They were incarcerated in Sudan for protesting against the government. I've pretty much lived in Iowa City my entirety of being in the United States. I'm thankful for everything Iowa City has given me. And so I can't in conscious leave this community without making it better for people that look like me, because we do have an extremely large, not only Sudanese immigrant population, but we also have a lot of Congolese immigrants. We have a lot of East African and Kenyan immigrants. And, you know, I don't think that it would be fair to leave those voices unheard and unspoken for, because I know that it's very easy in this society. So it's been difficult because you have pressure from, you know, your own community, people who are supporting the TRC and saying, you know, we believe in this, we want this to work, like we can do this. And my own pressure that I give myself, because I care about this city and I want it to be, you know, this, what I imagine it being, this giant melting pot. And I try really hard to get to connect people within each other, with other, like, for example, with our TRC right now, I think that it's really important for us to be reaching out to other groups who are already somewhat doing the work or have the trust and connections with the communities we're trying to hone into or hear from. You know, so I think that having just a community that trusts and loves and just celebrates and everything is just what I imagine. And one thing that's been really important to me in everything, in keeping my spirits high and trying to, you know, navigate everything, has been having people that I can really trust, that I can decompress with. It's not even that I need their advice. I don't need them to say, yes, girl, you're right. You know, I don't need that. It's just sometimes decompressing, because it is all really difficult. And the politics of my TRC, you know, it gets into politics within, you know, this commission. So that part has been really difficult for me to navigate. You know, local government is sticky and it's messy. And, you know, I really didn't have any idea how messy it was until this process. But I'm not going to give up, and there's no way that I'm going to let this commission, you know, end without some sort of report. And I know that that will happen. And yeah, I'll answer more of the questions during the Q&A, but I think that it's just really important to know just kind of the struggles that I've had within local politics and local government, trying to navigate that within everything that's happening.
That's amazing, Amal. I think you were doing the right choice, kind of putting this process in the context and speaking about the challenges, and then also, you know, the choices you made, that they were not just intentions, but clear choices and efforts. And I can, you know, just tell you that that every process that I have observed, participated, being involved with it is dependent on individuals like you to making those choices. And then what you said, it was so beautiful. I can assume Colette writing this quote down as well. You know, community that trusts, loves, and celebrates is what I have imagined. I think that's exactly what Colette has been, you know, recommending and suggesting to create Building on Her Think Peace podcast, and what Jody is now exercising leadership. So we hope something in response of this request will be provided to you. But thank you for that. And I'm sure, you know, Jody will want to acknowledge and speak to you in the Q&A as well. Our next speaker is Mohammed Tewis, and I must say, you know, he's my brother because of the work we have done together and the type of work we have done. But just to speak about, I think in Mohammed's CV, which I don't know if that appears there, but to me, you know, one of the high credentials is that he was a political prisoner during Gaddafi time, and just amidst of all those turmoils, then just suddenly was able to walk away, survive, become alive. But I'm sure it was incredibly hard. But like you, besides having to face that, then decided to in the middle of the chaos of the revolution and the continued battles, really dedicate your life into serving the actors in the grassroots that you saw could deliver Libya from this disaster. And I'm so at awe of what I saw you and your colleagues do when you helped to reconcile the tribes that have been pro and anti-Gaddafi. You can imagine those long years under dictatorship, the amount of skill set Mohammed was able to bring, but actually honoring the actors, not humiliating them, not putting them, in a basket, but basically enlightening these incredible insights and power these communities had. And that was just so skilled process. Besides that, you have been leading organizations, you've been working with the funders and organizations, and so on and so forth. So Mohammed, thank you for your efforts, and would love to hear from you.
Thank you, Antti. I'll start where you mentioned being a political prisoner during Gaddafi's era. It was in 2011, specifically during the Arab Spring. It is traumatizing experience, of course. The idea of the place that I was in 12 years before that, there was a massacre where Gaddafi killed like almost 300 political prisoners in the same night. So I was held captive in that place for almost 3 months, going through all the interrogations and torture and these kind of things. We managed to escape a week before our execution, actually. But yeah, I mean, going out, you ask yourself the question is, okay, why did we start this revolution? What is the end game? I had the chance to revenge, yes. It was very easy to do so because I was part of the winning side at the time, but that was not the point. So it was a very hard decision to take at that time, is to be involved in the reconciliation process, involved in the building the future of Libya, democratic transition, and the reconciliation part of it. We've led several processes. Specifically, one of them, the one that we witnessed, the tribal process between Gaddafi loyalists along with the other tribes. That was challenging before we reached that process in 2016. We started that process mainly in the beginning of 2014 at some point, because before going out and talking to the tribal leaders and discuss with them the process, we had to go through the process ourselves first. Yes, I mean, it was very difficult to do it along with the team, with different point of views, with different experiences that they have. Some of them are coming from the same revolutionary experience, and some of them are from the Gaddafi era, working with Gaddafi at the same time. So it was very difficult so second. Yeah. Is this better? Yeah. Okay.
Just go ahead. I mean, maybe just raise your voice, and that's fine.
Okay. I'll try. But yeah, anyway, it is very important to look into these processes and the peace builders in general. I mean, my personal experience was, instead of dealing with my experience, I got myself busy into the work, into the job, into dealing with the processes, mediation, conflict resolution, and so on. But I forgot about myself in that space. first you put it on the side for some time, and then after some years you get overwhelmed, you get burned out, you get sick eventually. It is high pressure, as Anna mentioned earlier, because the local reconcilers, they don't apply for this job. They don't seek for it. They don't announce it. You know, they find themselves into it. They find, because of their positions within their communities and their constituencies, and the trust that they have with the local actors, they find themselves into it. They wake up in one day and they find themselves doing these processes. It is without previous experience about peace building. I mean, I'm talking about the Libyan case specifically. We never heard about conflict resolution, or reconciliation, or civil society organization and these kind of things before 2011. It was taboo. I mean, it never existed before. You're not allowed to talk politics in the first place. So it was very challenging to find yourself into that position. I mean, for me personally, it was 10 days after going out of prison, where we organized our first political reconciliation process in Tripoli, and that happened just because at some point you receive a phone call like, okay, we need you to be here because you know that, and he trusts you, or you know that person and he respects you, and you need to bring them together in the same table to discuss those political matters or security matters and so on. And then we moved on to the social aspects and the tribes. So I'll leave it to that here, and I'll move on. Give it back to you, Antti, and yeah, I'll wait for the questions.
Thank you, Mohammed, and thank you also kind of outlining kind of the reality where just the fate itself might put somebody in a position without really having had the time, but just because of their character, the trust, and I'm just also thinking about you mentioned your parents and them, you know, having had to flee Sudan and what's going on there today. At least 2 people were killed today on the streets by the military, and how incredible that pressure and feeling is. And again, some people are exercising incredible leadership amidst those pressures. So Mohammed, your example was just another illustration what's happening and where the actual hope is, but how how strongly we should be behind these actors and help them in any possible way. So our next speaker, Nick Sherwood, he has really dedicated his life, his professional life in terms of his practical work, but also his academic life into understanding what exactly actors like you all would need and benefit. So Nick came to the Carter School of Conflict Analysis and Resolution from the field of psychology, and he was already helping people in different kind of situations of stress. But within Carter School, he's been really spearheading not only the school's understanding how this should be applied in this field, which itself has been really very ignorant of the topic itself. And when I'm looking backwards, having been a peace mediator or working at grassroots level for 25 years, we have been totally ignorant and misunderstanding the impact of human brain into conflicts. And so the work you are doing in terms of not only bringing that knowledge to our school, but also through your research mapping what the needs of the local actors are, can potentially be extremely significant. And besides that, you're practicing it yourself. So you're not just somebody sitting in an armchair, but you're there in the front lines of the racial justice struggle, doing not only your research, but also assisting the actors themselves. So, and besides this, he's assistant director of the Marriott Center. Really fun, nice colleague to have. Nick, over to you.
Thanks so much, Antti. Yeah, so Nick Sherwood, he, him, his. I think a little bit of positionality is going to be useful. I'm a gay man, grew up in backwoods, rural East Tennessee. Did school throughout the American South, farthest north I've ever lived was DC to do my coursework for the Carter School. And now I'm back in Athens, Georgia. So I lived in Athens 2015 and 2016. Finished undergrad, did not know what I wanted to be when I grew up, and came here and was a bartender and a barista and worked at farmers markets, and got somehow really heavily entrenched in the anti-racist activist organizing scene. At the time, I really didn't think of myself as an organizer or activist. I knew I kind of wanted to be in mental health, kind of wanted to be peace building field, but the path, and Jody, I really resonate with what you said earlier about sort of being pulled into this path, called into this path. Yeah, that I definitely identify with that. That was part of my story. I got pulled into these anthropology degree and then this conflict resolution degree. And when time came to choose dissertation topic, I was focusing largely on the Middle East, Israel, Palestine, Syria, and George Floyd happened. And a lot of my friends, both here in Athens and in the Carter School PhD program, were like, listen, you're a gay white guy from the South. You know the Southern language, you're part of a marginalized community. You can kind of do this. I think that there's a way for you to be a boundary crosser, a bridge walker. And so came back to Athens sort of with this new training under my belt, with this renewed interest in mental health and in peace building. And then I visited last summer to just, I don't know, kind of start reintegrating into the community. And the night I drove into town was the night that, and I didn't know this was happening, when the anti-racist activist community was in the, in front of the courthouse, like in the middle of downtown, and we're getting tear gassed and tased and shot by rubber bullets and jailed and hunted down by cops. And last summer, I think, was a watershed moment for me. I've been studying well-being, mental health, resilience building, etc. I had not been completely immersed in a conflict context where well-being had just been completely out the window. My friends, co-organizers, co-activists, co-peace builders were deeply, deeply traumatized. As a result, I started seeing a profound, almost psycho-spiritual shift in tactics. Suddenly, my friends who were strong adherents to nonviolent peace-building methodologies are advocating for acts of violence. Schisms started forming in the peace-building community here, in the anti-racist community. These sort of gatekeepers popped up, and I understand that a lot of this came from a need to protect the self and a need to protect the community. But I watched like just entire psychologies sort of twisted as a result of state-sponsored violence. And I'm also really quick to add here, I struggle with the ethics of placing the burden of responsibility on individual peacemakers to protect their own mental health and well-being when we are going up against structures that place us to be unwell and structures that place us to be more likely to experience mental illness, to experience these types of symptoms. And so this is a dialectic that I'm really sitting with, is what's the responsibility of the individual peace builder? What's the responsibility of the field? What's the responsibility of broader society? So that's sort of where the context I'm coming at this from. I look at 5 interlocking sources of well-being: physical, cognitive, emotional, social, and spiritual. I think that these all work together. There are other domains of well-being. These are just the big ones that I look at. I often categorize resilience as resistance. I think that there is an inseparable bond between being a resilient person, and I can't remember who it was. Jody, maybe it was you or Amal, about the various isms that we're living in. Resilience, I do believe, is a resistance to these isms. And so yeah, the base question I'm trying to answer through my research and practice is, how do we create healthier, happier, safer, and more sustainable peace builders everywhere? What does it mean to cross social boundaries and to be often demonized by both sides of a conflict? What forms of resilience are necessary to engage in those processes? How do we not burn out as peace builders? I can tell you my personal strategies. I know I need 7.5 hours of sleep a night. If I don't, I become kind of a crazy person. I need big lifts with a personal trainer 3 to 4 times a week. I know I need nutritious foods. I heard celebration earlier. I am all about celebrating our victories. And that's something that I'm really super proud of for the Athens anti-racist community as well, is after a successful demonstration or a picket or whatever, a lot of the activists would go to a local bar, shoot pool, hang out, and it was a tradition. And we always knew, like, okay, that's something to look forward to. And that there is ritual in that, and there is ritual in celebration. Celebration does lead to remembrance. And so I'm just looking to see if there's anything else. I'll also say I think that there is going to be a new turn in the peace building field if folks like us can act in solidarity and capitalize on a renewed commitment to protecting well-being. American Psychological Association, for example, just put out a statement apologizing to communities of colors for acts of violence that APA had committed against them. It's a good first step. Right now, it's a document. And so until you're actually engaging in decidedly decolonial and anti-racist practices, it's just a document, right? But I do think that that could be a herald of changes from like the big names in mental health promotion in the US. Just as peace and conflict studies has gone through sort of a social psychology turn, I do think that it's possible for us to push that even farther into a mental health and individual psychology turn. I'm really, really pleased to find people like you, Colette, all about somatics, neuroscience, et cetera. When I first started this intellectual and practical journey a few years back, I felt oftentimes that I was on an island and I was the only person who was sort of preaching the mental health thing, well-being thing. And so I'm just overjoyed to find there's more and more of us who are taking this really seriously. Yeah, I'm just looking around to see if there's anything else. That's it for me. I want to get to Q&A. I think that's going to be more important, but yeah, I just wanted y'all to have sort of a sense of where my journey was coming from.
Cool. Thank you, Nick. And I'm sure you all, felt his charisma. When Nick smiles, it will touch you. And so this is how cool it is to work with people who are not only preaching, but exercising as well. Well, friends, we have a nice crowd. I know this webinar setting us up is a little bit awkward, but everybody who is online can be spotlighted and we can open your camera. So once either you lift up your hand or you put your hand in the Q&A, that would be awesome. I have one story to share, and then I have kind of made some questions for you participants. Jody, I'll go first to you. But the story I want to share is, so one of the incredible peacemakers, actually, who is still in America, and I'd love to have you and her connect. Her name is Teklan Namachana Wanchala. She was an EMU trained like Jody, and she studied with John Paul Lederach and other people there. And then went back to her country, Kenya, and they were nominating in commission. And then she thought, look, I don't want just lawyers to be involved in this process. There has to be also peace builders. We also need to bring the community voices into it. And so she submitted an application, was the only one not nominated, but applying, and by her surprise, she was chosen. But those of you who know, the Kenyan Commission got really in deep turmoil, a little bit like the Iowa, but perhaps in a little bit bigger scale, because their chair was being accused of being part of massacres, land grabbing, other human rights violations. So the human rights groups really created incredible pressure, and gladly they had rules, and he had to step aside. Just before that, another woman, the vice chair, had resigned. So there were only 3 women in the commission, and then basically, I guess it was more or less, Tekla had to take the vice chair, and suddenly she ended up needing to chair a commission in deep crisis, at odds with the Human Rights Commission, with incredible pressures. It was forced by Kofi Annan's mediation on the government, And basically everybody knew that if they would do the research and find out, they would be pointing fingers on some of the political leading actors. What that woman in that space did is just purely incredible. She made it survivor centered. She made the commission to go and start their work in the most affected community in Mount Elgon. And through that direction of the survivor voices, they were able to gather 40,000 testimonies. Once the report became, published, the politicians wanted to change things. They were pointing fingers to quite significant actors, and so Tekla had to go hiding. And when they were announcing the report, she came out of her hiding just for the press conference, but sneaked out before it was over, so that she could go back into hiding. And she had to hide for more than a year because of threats on her life. But she said, I became bitter. I couldn't understand why would a state spend all these resources and not move forward with it. And then she went for a retreat, I think 10 months in Germany. And in that retreat, she was able to reflect on the process, study other commissions, and realize that this is basically the reality everywhere. I don't know if that's comforting to you, Amal, but then what she decided was quite another extraordinary thing. She said, look, I have held one of the highest offices in my country as well, Amal, you are now in your city. I can go and start to implement this on my own without funds, but because of my resilience, because the skill sets I have. And there she went to the Mount Elgon, again, the most affected area, started convening social healing circles, basically without resources. And that's where we met her, and she became a fellow at the Mary Oak Center, and we were able to give her little funds as a few other entities, so she could convene and expand that social healing work. How I imagine this is a little bit like each of these processes require a vessel that's often a human being. And if we compare this vessel into a car, it's a car that's being kicked around. The windshield is broken. It's not a fancy, nice vessel from the outwards. You have all these dents, you can criticize from this and that, but actually this was the vessel that carried that dream into reality and put it in motion. And we just have to recognize that, and we just have to celebrate that. We have to see that integrity in those actions. And so with this another story, I'll open the Q&A. And Jody, I'd like to ask from you first, two things on what actually Amal spoke, and I'll let you choose whichever part you want to address. But she spoke about this need for hope and positive attitudes, and maybe a little bit more precise. What would be your advice for her, being that commissioner, how to maintain that hope and positive attitude? And the second, just to your efforts and leadership in this country, on her request, I'm imagining a community where I can trust, I can be loved, and we can celebrate. What could that become? Jody, over to you.
Well, great question. Thank you for that. And thank you all for all your shares. I really appreciated it. I realized I jumped right in. So real quick, Auntie, before I answer that, I'll say the way that I show up in the world is really leaning into restorative justice, not just in what we see as the work, but even my life, which is challenging, right? To admit when you've done harm, but also to think about how do you build safe enough and brave communities within your family, within your friends, and the larger community. And I lean into restorative justice with an anti-racist, anti-bias lens. And it's only been over the last few years that restorative justice itself is even talking about race and the ability for restorative justice not to be a program, but to also transform systems. And it's the same way that I approach truth-telling and reparations commissions. Although, we use the language of reconciliation, we can use all of that. So the way that I even lean into these processes is in telling the truth. How do we also talk about healing? How do we make recommendations about healing moving forward, and repair that is also monetary, but repair that also exists in many other ways? Because I think that even within the framing of some of the current conversations around reparations, it's still bounded by capitalism. Like, yes, I want you to cut the check, but I also want you to acknowledge what this thing is for, and that charity is not reparations, right? Like writing something into one's yearly giving around the holidays is not reparations if actions and behaviors and attitudes are not changing, and people are in systems and communities where they can continue to perpetuate harm. So I think in terms of truth-telling commissions, right, there's the work that happens before just to get the commission. We know that that's a very loaded, right? And then there's what happens within the commission. Even that is really important to think about what is the lens and what is the approach in telling the truth, right? Because if you're having individuals sharing their stories, like what does that do for the body? And how do we lean into rituals to even be able to set the stage for the truth telling to be made possible and to be able to support folks, right? And then what happens after? And I think where we are in the country and the world, we're really well positioned where recommendations can be implemented from truth-telling commissions. And we saw the first commission that happened in the US with Greensboro, North Carolina, that had so much happening. I won't critique that right now, but one of the things is some of those recommendations are just being implemented. And at that time, it was challenging in the larger community to use the language of reparations because the fear of it. And I think people are still afraid of it, but it's catchy. So anything that's catchy, people are going to use it if it gives them more funding or it gives them more visibility, unfortunately. And it's up to us to be able to push back against that. So I think it's really about looking at those three things, what happens before the commission, right? And being really critical. And then this moment of truth telling and asking the question of what comes next. And recognizing even in the what comes next, it won't happen overnight. And I think people recognize that, but to be realistic that even some of those changes we want might not happen like within our time of serving as a commissioner. And so I want to be able to name really looking at those three things with a critical lens. One of the things I will name is the Elaine, Arkansas Truth Telling Commission that I had the privilege and honor of being a commissioner on, and the previous year being a witness to a Memphis Truth Telling Commission with the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference, a meal that we're actually going to be connecting you all with. Dr. Fania Davis, after our meeting last night with folks, and we had Muhammad on, I woke up to an email this morning where she had already emailed Dr. Ivor Carruthers and Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference. I'm getting chills. The work is incredible, the documentation. I'm like, wow, how do you get this done? And I made a commitment after being a commissioner in Elaine to continue to share this story. And that was a request from Elaine, Arkansas community members. So in short, a massacre took place in Elaine that lasted over the duration of a few days. And I can drop in the chat more details and information and highlight the incredible work of the Elaine Legacy Center to continue to tell the role of this particular community in Elaine, Arkansas, as a part of the civil rights movement, but to also keep this story alive. Although many people who are descendants of those that were harmed and continue to live in a community never had space to share this. So it's kind of like telling a story, but doing that in silence. Right. And there was propaganda circulated throughout the community that basically was telling Black community members that they can't speak about this, they can't name this. The same challenge we saw in Greensboro, where there was challenge around like, how do we name what happened? Massacre, like there were all this language to really downplay the real violence that took place in the community. And so this commission happened in Elaine, Arkansas, and even the care that was held within the space around ritual and prayer and silence, and even thinking about who gets to tell the story. For example, there are people who weren't signed up to speak, but there were community members who were moved and said, I feel called to share how this has impacted me, how this may have impacted my aunt and my uncle, and how I too still begin to feel that, or how young people are moving out of the community, right? Like this movement that happened throughout the space, and also for those stories to be sacred and not be recorded by media. And if you did without people's consent, best to believe you're going to have to delete that before you even left the space. So even the intentionality and the sacred way that that space was held, and the ability of truth telling to be a part of someone's healing. And then as commissioners to ask the question, what do you need? What do you need? And what do you want us to do? And one of the needs was to tell the story of Elaine. And I said, all right, I could be somewhere where the conversation isn't even about Elaine and I'll bring it up, right? To make this commitment to tell the truth about what happened and the impact of that. And so truth telling commissions are important in that way. And then asking the question of what comes next, right? Telling the story, but also what comes next. So, you know, some of this looks like the reparations work that's happening in Elaine, Arkansas right now, and the work to really make visible the Elaine Legacy Center and the role that Elaine, Arkansas played as a part of, you know, this movement and the community members that still exist. There's also some incredible artists in Elaine, Arkansas who are writing screenplays to be able to tell the story of Elaine, Arkansas. And I'll drop a link because, you know, not enough time, but I think some of it is really thinking critically about this before. And even for community members, people in the periphery we might not think about often, people who aren't telling the story, people who are just walking through the community, knowing a commission is happening, but maybe not interested. What does it mean to bring those people in? And some of that could be like working with local artists, to kind of develop spaces in a community where people get to also share their truths, or to provide some kind of illustration, some kind of marker. It could look like some of the work that EJI is doing, right? So thinking about how to engage those folks beforehand. It could look like working with libraries to do kind of historical installations, which they do very well. So this work of before and this work about how to hold sacred space in between. And then in asking the question of really what comes next, that that will happen on many different levels. So there's a lot. I have a lot of thoughts. And the last thing I'll add, as I said, I was about to finish. The last thing I'll add is when I think about the work that the UN identified around the basic principles and guidelines for the rights to remedy and reparations for victims of gross violations of international human rights and so on, right? So they have kind of these 5 categories. And it's restitution, restitution, damages, rehabilitation, satisfaction. And the 5th one that I want to name is guarantees of non-repeat. And I think that's something that we need to talk about in this country, particularly guarantees of non-repeat, right? Like what happens when we acknowledge the harm that has taken place, but also acknowledge the legacy, right? So we can talk about particularly enslavement and genocide, and yet there is a legacy that continues through mass incarceration, what we look at our education system, the field of gynecology, higher academia, where most colleges and universities are founded on enslavement money, right? Development of roads and highways and how that contributes to asthma in communities of color, even our policies around resettlement. I did a lot of resettlement work as well. So I think really looking at that legacy and ask the question, when there's space for repair and truth-telling, what does guarantees of non-repeat look like? Because we can continue to provide multiple forms of reparations and yet systems in place where people become commodities and objects, quite honestly. So I'll end that there and I'll pass it back to you. Thank you.
That's amazing. Yeah, Jody, that's really amazing. And thank you also for speaking to the other process where you were a commissioner and the Arkansas process. That was really helpful. Now, I'll let Amal come in, but I'll make one additional comment to the reparation, because I think this non-repetition, that's exactly, the country also needs conversation about it. What does it mean? Because non-repetition, if you really want to address that, has to include a change of mind of those who have been harming. Because the risk without having that involved is that mindset that it's still, not change, will look for other ways to continue the harm. And so my conversations with Dr. Gail Christopher over the last year has really kind of informed me of the situation in this country, what it means to invite the entity that has been harming into a process where they become aware of that harm, and that this change of mind is also contributing to creating this enabling environment for effective reparations. And I think somehow it's too much a minefield, this conversation currently in this country. And I think there needs to be a little bit of opening up just to understand the complexity of these things, because without that change of mind, the struggle is likely going to face pushback. Amal, when I was observing the commission meeting, you mentioned there like how you have been looking into restorative justice, and there, it came immediately to my mind the work with Jody, what she's doing, but also Fania Davis, whom she mentioned, who is behind the RTO as well. And just speaking out to her character, when she heard about your struggles and had the chance to listen to Mohamed Traore, her response was immediately rally support. So I think there again is this living the restorative justice, being actively engaging through that method. So I don't have any question to you beyond just allowing you just to have a conversation with Jody again, because I know that you have so much to share and ask, and whatever you want to bring on this front, feel free to do so.
Well, so in looking at some of also that Q&A too, like some of the biggest hurdles, one thing about me, and I don't know if it's, both of, and well, before I even say that, my dad was incarcerated for 3 years as a political prisoner. So everything you said, Mohammed, really resonated with me. And I think you're so brave, and your story is incredible. Like, I can't imagine what the fear and everything just being in your position. So before I start, I wanted to commend you on how far you've come and everything. Like, I was getting teared up listening. So I'm a very emotional person. I'm really empathetic. I feel very heavily, and I used to think this was like the worst thing about me. And I'm also pretty intense. Like, I'm the type of person that's, if I have an idea and I want to try something, then I'm like, why don't I put my money where my mouth, like, put your money where your mouth is, and try it for yourself. And, I've had things that I've dealt with just as far as like mental health struggles that have allowed me to be in spaces where I can talk about trauma. For example, when I got out of high school, I dealt with an eating disorder that I had to be hospitalized for over 3 months. And the amount of group therapy and stuff that you do, it doesn't, go away. It really sticks with you. So one thing that I've struggled with, and it's gotten so much easier actually ever since I kind of made it public, was I am currently involved in a sexual assault trial. I am the victim. I don't like the word victim, but and I don't like that narrative. But at my core, I'm an abolitionist. And when this happened, I wasn't as into restorative justice. This was a few years ago, and this person just got arrested this year recently. And I was having all of these internal struggles, like, why, first of all, I wasn't even notified, but that's like a different whole other thing within the system that just sucks. But I knew that whatever process that I was going to be put through was not going to help me mentally. I thought it was going to further traumatize me, just because of historically what the system does to brown and Black folks who are in my type of situation. And I didn't think that healing for me was sending this man to prison for 10 years. And then to come out of the prison and then just nothing, because prisons are supposed to be these rehabs and, all of this stuff. So I was just in a really messed up spot. And I really had to, put my money where my mouth is when it came to like what I believe restorative justice is, what I think is going to be healing for me, what accountability looks like for me, and what that situation, if it went the way that it did, with trial and everything, what was I going to get out of it? Was it going to be beneficial for me in the long scheme of things? So I wrote this article, and the way that I ended it was hurting him wouldn't make me whole, because it's true, putting him in, and I think of prisons as rape factories. Miriam Kaba says that. But, there's a lot of sexual assault and a lot of trauma that happens in prisons, and it's not a place where this person would be rehabilitated or come out better. And I'm not saying that what this person did doesn't warrant some type of accountability, or, we use the word punishment, and I don't like that word very much either. But, I want to sit in a circles with this man And I'm doing what I can right now to figure out how to get that process to go. But that's been one thing, is like setting the example. And even though this is like an intense example, like very, it doesn't happen a lot, but people don't talk about it. And I think that it's important to set the example for what I imagine justice to look like in the future for other people. Because if people see how much healing I get from this, and maybe, he would get healing, the justice system sucks, so he's going to get time. That's just how it's going to end up. But what can I do to make this a process that can be something that we do more often? And I don't even know if that's kind of where you were going with things, but I really think that I have to do what I envision the world to look like. And with my, in regards to my peace building and mental health, I know sometimes that there are certain tasks that are things that I shouldn't or I can't take on. Like when people want support for sending someone to jail, that just isn't, it's not a good way to spend my energy, because it's not my core beliefs that, that's going to be the solution. But I try to find other ways. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Go on.
But yeah, I just, I just want to set that example for people to know that, like, it doesn't have to be what we've always been taught it should be. There are the imagining thing. I love the imagining, because it's like people don't realize that, like, the way that we think it's programmed. Okay, we're a victim. This person did this, they get punished, and it's just, it doesn't have to be like that. And yeah, I love imagining, daydreaming about what this place could be if we just had, a little bit more of community and more circles, maybe, I guess. But I'm going to leave it there.
Well, I don't think there could be any more powerful illustration of, first of all, what restorative justice can become and be and deliver, and second, what leadership can be. So you just brought, the understanding of who you are and your leaders in totally different sphere. So thank you for sharing that. It is really powerful. One of the observations I have made when I'm observing people coming out of injustice and harm and pain is that often we have this misinterpretation that going to court, somehow this notion of injustice will be dealt with. The purpose of court is to interpret the law. And that's also partially why survivors or victims don't really get cared for and can actually become more hurt through the process. And so that's also what, many people involved in restorative justice, mandated restorative justice, recognize that much more, survivors are much more healed and happier when they come out of that process. And I think there could not be a more powerful case than what you just shared. Marissa, I think you have noted that we have somebody with the hand up, and we welcome this question. Can you bring the person?
Yes, thank you for allowing me to ask this question. This is Raju in Boulder. Just wondering, is there any neurochemistry scientific data that could be used to help those that are strong in empathy and compassion, to help those who are not strong in that area? I'll mute and listen to the answers. Thank you.
Raju, that's a wonderful question, and good to see you again. If none of the panelists will answer, I think Colette might be able to give some ideas in the end. So as we go forward, please also panelists raise your hand, and Jody, if you want to respond to Amal, what you shared, I'd love to give you a space for that. But also what I was just thinking about, next, Mohammed, just hearing and seeing about these exchanges that are happening inside United States and the solidarity that is being built among the actors. I can tell you all, when I have started to learn to know these characters and individuals who are leading this space, like Jody and now Amal, I sleep my nights because I see this country has what it takes. It may be a long journey. It will be a difficult journey, certainly, but this country has what it takes. And this is not just the boosting, how we're especially in the United States, but that's actually really work-based understanding built through trial, what will actually deliver this country to be more truthful for its values. How would you, Mohammed, see the support needs for international actors, and how could we, learn from your case, but also from this work in the United States, so that those in Sudan today demonstrating, those in Ethiopia in hiding, those fearing for election-based violence in Kenya would have similar solidarity and support structures globally?
Yeah, although it might be a little bit different in terms of the context itself. Civil war in other countries. I mean, the way I look at it, it's understanding the conflict is one of the most important aspects in any reconciliation process and peace building or conflict prevention, and I mean any kind of a process. Understanding and customizing and designing a specific plan and a program based on this understanding is very important, because in other contexts we have seen, or I've seen personally, and I'm sure most of you did, is that when people come in and deal with a specific conflict or experience or a process with the same blueprint that they did before or developed before, and that sometimes usually does not work. So what we can do, or what we can help and support, is the understanding mechanisms that we learned throughout our experience in the past years, and how to implement those before implementing designing projects. And going back to one of the questions is how to address the needs of peace builders in the programs. One of the experiences that I had in 2015, 2016, where we were trying to develop a project, we had the aspect of the psychological support to the peace builder, to the peace builders, to the local peace builders, as almost 20% of the project, actually, because at that time we believed that it is as much important as the process itself. If you have healthy people, if you have people who actually have the kind of support that they need in order to implement their project, you have a better chances in the success of the implementation of this project, even more. So yeah, I mean, it's difficult to say. I mean, to go back to your question, I think it's very difficult to say how can we support this process from an international aspect or from the international eyes. I would say it's starting from understanding the roots of the problems. I mean, like, focus on that, spend as much time as we need to understand the issues, the detailed issues, so we can customize and develop a plan based on those needs.
Thank you, Mohammed. I mean, obviously, I wish you would be part of designing these collegial spaces and support structures. You have so much to give and offer. Nick, I'd like to come to you with the question, and perhaps responding to also from my small perspective to the question that was put on what has been hardest within this process. Not necessarily hardest for me personally, but most surprising was that once you start to deal with incredible, painful legacies of colonialism, assimilation in the United States, incredible cross violations of human rights. And when a process starts, I experienced this with the Samis, that there are some people who become triggered quite deeply. And I'd love to hear, Jody, your perspective on this, or Amal, if you have experienced this as well. But when you start to speak about an opportunity of putting the intergenerational pain and starting to deal with it, some people get quite triggered about it. And I think they come especially from the human rights bench. I think there's certain tension between quite strict human rights perspective on how this should go and what justice means into what reconciliation, healing, and restorative justice will try to deliver. And so the way I understood or kind of assumed this the reasons I assumed to be behind it is that if someone has not been in a situation where there has been enough safety for them to deal what they carry, it's it's extremely frightening. It's extremely frightening and triggering that someone will start, and if they fear it's an artificial, not a true process, rather than investing into creating that process, that you become triggered and aggressive against it. Nick, how do you see this? I mean, is there, did I see it right?
This is a really important point. This is something I'm struggling with in Athens right now. My work for a few years was decidedly in the human rights space. My master's degree focused on the intersection of mental health and international human rights law. And I was working and studying in Birmingham, Alabama. Birmingham's a really interesting place in terms of social movements. It's a really interesting place in terms of how the Birminghamians themselves think about anti-racist issues, and in recent years, how they're connecting the struggle for civil rights with the universal or global or whatever trans solidarity struggle for human rights. So I moved out of the decidedly human rights space because, for whatever reason, I think intuitively, I felt that the peace building, trauma healing, psychosocial, that just felt more Nicholas. I'm familiar with the human rights language. I don't know why maybe it just is personality, life history, whatever. I wasn't comfortable operating in the human rights space here in Athens. By contrast, a lot of the anti-racist organizers and activists come from a really, really decided human rights sort of, I don't know, framing, worldview. And I'm trying to kind of check my whiteness and check my privilege right now as well, because it's not my place to critique how people organize or how they activate community. I will say I've noticed tensions within the anti-racist and within the anti-racist communities here. One sort of subculture is like, we want reparations now, abolition now. We are not willing to work with the local city commissions because they have perpetrated acts of racism, sexism, homophobia, therefore, to touch that structure we would be drinking from the poison well. On the other hand, the more peace building, restorative justice, reparative justice folks are more likely to sort of, I don't know, play with the bad guys even sounds like super dualistic. But I think it's a useful illustration. And the anti-racist community in Athens right now is experiencing a major schism. I don't know where I sit in all of this. I also haven't been in town. I mean, I just moved back in August, so I don't have like a tremendous, the schism began last summer after the Georgia Floyd protests, and there was a difference of opinion on how to handle said protests. So it's a weird thing. I don't have an answer. I can engage in conflict analysis and say, like, yeah, there are these two sort of different approaches to anti-racist work in my community. I don't know if it's, I will say I'm not comfortable acting as a third-party mediator. And I just know that that's not my role in this conflict. I don't know if it would be trainings, workshops, facilitators, third-party mediators that's gonna have the answer. I don't know if it's self-reflection. It's probably a both and situation here. My wish is, my greatest wish is that the human rights defenders and the peace builders are able to co-imagine, and someone said like co-create, co-whatever, co-daydream. I think that that would be the ideal situation. And I look forward, if anyone has suggestions on how to facilitate that space, I'm all ears. But you do raise a really interesting point, Auntie. Thank you, Nick. And when I listen to Jody and Fania, they speak about also healing justice, and so the justice is there. Human rights is a foundation that we cannot question, but there is something that goes beyond it. And I think Amal in her case gave a lot of insights to that. Fortunately, we're running out of time. I have promised Colette to have 5 minutes to close this up, but I would say that perhaps, we should Google, Jody, when you are speaking next time. Maybe you can come back to this, because I know you have so much to offer on this question. I would personally also want to listen and learn more. But thanking you, Jody, for coming here. Amal, thank you for sharing that situation and your personal story, and just that incredible leadership that you are putting in the process, and who you are. And Mohammed, thank you for coming and sharing this insight that you gave, and Nick, for the research you do, the work you do, and the energy you bring. My apologies for not being able to cover more ground in the Q&A, but thank you for all the insights that you all shared. Over to you, Colette.
Okay. First of all, I just wanted to thank very deeply Jody, Amel, Mohammed, and Nick for today's thoughtful discussion. And I just wanted to kind of hold the space for a moment for us to express gratitude and just to kind of feel with into ourselves and into our bodies and our minds and our reflections, all the wisdom that you brought, and the sharing and the authenticity and the stories that you shared. It was just really an amazing time to spend with everyone here. And also, I wanted to thank the incredible Mary Hoke Center for Reconciliation team for all their work in bringing this webinar to life. So a big shout out to Nick, to Marisa Maddox, who helped us organize everything and was part of the original group that by committee came up with the 3-part series in this topic. And also thank you to Auntie for his amazing support and moderating today's event. Before we close, I want to let everyone know that the next event will be on February 23rd, same time from noon to 1:30. And this one will focus on healing across cultures, integrating peace building with local wisdom and practices. And you can register now. Risa's putting that in the chat, and the link to the flyer and the whole event series will be in the chat. And what we really looked at, and I just so appreciate, as I mentioned, everything that our presenters mentioned today, because what we were really looking at in developing this series was really to turn things on its head. Where oftentimes in peace building and reconciliation processes, the impetus is things from the external out. And I was really struck by comments that Jody made, Mohammed, and Amel and Nick. What we're really talking about is asking the question, what is it that people need? And that is what drives everything, and what would be helpful. And that wisdom already exists. And that's why a lot of times people who are called upon in their community to step forward, as Mohammed mentioned, are not the so-called experts who have studied a certain thing, but they're people who are trusted in community, and they're people that people look for and feel comfortable and safe. And we know that that is the beginning of relation, and where transformation of relations and community starts is with each other in community and in trust, as Jody had mentioned. So I also wanted to flag a few things that we've been working on over the past many months. And if you'd like to explore some of the issues, I know a question came up about this issue of neuroscience or neurobiology and compassion empathy. But if you're interested more broadly in some of the work, I would invite you to look at the Think Peace podcast, where peace crosses the mind. My colleague, Cam Kasser, who's on this call, who's sitting and working on his master's program right now in Malta, is the senior producer. And I'm the host of this series, and we're really looking at what is the intersection of neuroscience and peace building, and what can we learn about neuroscience and the umbrella of fields under that can help guide our local processes, things like trauma, intergenerational trauma, the us versus them dynamic, the issues of bias that is known and sometimes unknown to ourselves, and how do things like dehumanization split societies apart, and how can disinformation and things like that be used as weapons to divide communities, and how can we really think about our body from a somatic standpoint, as well as our minds as a system that can help facilitate or help hamper relations in community and trust and reconciliation. And then also, if you would be interested in reading more, we created a 3-part series. It's www.neuropeace.org. And all these topics are covered, written by neuroscientists and Peacebuilders, where we put reflections and essays together if you'd like to read more about the research and practice. Going back to the podcast real quick, it's www.thinkpeacepodcast.com. It's on Apple, Spotify, everything. And then finally, this webinar, as well as past webinars from MHCR, are on the website. So you can go to the website to watch them at your leisure. And there's also summaries of each one that you can read. And that's at www.mhcr.gmu.edu. So thank you all for joining us, and have a great day, and hope to see you at our next one. But thank you, panelists, and thank you everyone who joined us.